My story really began back when I was 16. I went to Germany as an exchange student, and for the first time I was away from my family and had to make all my life decisions, and was in a country where I barely spoke the language and with a family that I didn't know very well. And that was the first time I had depression and didn't even really know what it was. But I cut my time short there and I came home, and I got over it pretty quickly and went on with my life, and for probably, I would say 15 to 20 years, I just managed those episodes whenever they came. I went to college, I got married, herbs came into my life, and we started treating most of our ailments with herbs and natural products. And children came, and those pregnancies went well, and it wasn't really until we had our fifth, our son, Ethan, and the pregnancy was harder physically, as well as emotionally, and especially after he was born. That was the first time I really had a long-term depressive episode. And the herbs that I was taking were okay, but definitely not helping me out of that. And so for probably almost a year, I struggled with postpartum. And just as I was coming out of it, about a year after he was born, a couple months later, we got pregnant with our last child. And I always tell people I could tell the day that I conceived with her, because the entire pregnancy was very difficult. And towards the end, I was feeling such a disconnect with this baby and struggling so hard with all the other kids. And I went to a therapist, and he gave me a test for depression, and checking off all those boxes, I saw how bad it really was. And he says, "You are clinically depressed. You are as bad as it gets." And I thought, well, it's probably just the pregnancy, and I'll probably have a little postpartum, and I'm sure it'll go away after that. And she was born, and she had hip dysplasia in both hips. So not only was I managing 5 other kids, my little newborn baby needed more care, and I was driving her up to a children's hospital for her care. And needless to say, postpartum was as bad as it could have been. And there were times where I was very hopeless, and times where I worried about harming myself or my children. At that time, I was still taking herbs. I was still taking B12s. I was still taking multivitamins. I was still taking a lot of common herbs that were available. And about 6 months after she was born, Greg and I were going to go out of the country for a long trip, 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. And we both sat down, and I remember that night thinking, there's no way I can do this. Barely hanging on as it was, there was no way I could arrange every detail that needed to happen to leave 6 kids and a 6-month-old baby and leave the country and go on this trip. And so we had a good heart-to-heart, and it was decided that I would stay back, and I was convinced that I needed to do something more. And so I talked to my doctor, and so I went on an antidepressant. And I had fought it for so many years of my life, thinking that was just the worst thing in the world I could do. And up until that point, the herbs had been working. And so it was hard to make that decision and to realize that that's the point that I was at. But as soon as I went on it, I had such a peace and such a feeling of comfort in my life. I felt just calm and peaceful. And I remember one time standing at the kitchen sink, just looking outside, thinking, I forgot what it felt like to be happy, and I forgot what it felt like to have peace in my life. And so I was so thankful at that moment that I had made that decision because for me at that moment it was right. So he got back from his trip, and I can't remember exactly how you said it, but it was something to the effect of, I came home to a new wife, because I felt so much better and I had so much more positivity in my life. And so it helped me through the hardest time. And so I was on it for a good year and still taking herbs and managing well and feeling good, despite, the side effects that naturally come from it, but feeling good. And after about a year, it stopped really working. I had my symptoms coming back. I was struggling more days than not. And so I talked to my doctor and he says, well, we can put you on a different one or you can up your dose. So we upped my dose a little bit. And that gave me a few more months of feeling good again. And then it stopped working again. And he says, well, we can up your dose again, or we can change drugs if you want. And so we upped the dose one more time, and it was very quickly after that again, it was not working. And so knowing that we were at that point, that we would either have to continue down the drug road of switching drugs and trying to find the right dose, or trying to go off it and trying to find something that was going to be better for me long-term, more natural, better for my health.
Right at that moment where we knew we needed to take a different path, weren't quite sure what, I happened to be president of a division of the herb company that I had worked for 20 years. And had an opportunity to have a dinner with one of the leaders who was recently having a lot of success helping others with nutrition. He talked about these herbs. They were more concentrated than the typical, and it was a group of them, not just one or two, but it was 7 different combinations, and they were principally Chinese herbs. And she talked about how she started taking them because her mother had bought them, and she didn't believe anything in herbs, and they sat on her fireplace mantle for weeks, and she finally just decided they probably won't hurt me and I'm not getting better. So this is her story. And I shared all that with Donna, and so she immediately said, I'd like to add those. Let's add those and let's see if it makes a difference. So to me, it was something significant. It wasn't just, hey, let's try this. It was something that the timing of it came when we needed it most, I think. And like Donna said, I think my memory was somewhere around, 4, 5, 6 months of backing down. And then we had this trip that we were supposed to go to when the small dose that you were still on of the antidepressant, it got forgotten.
Yeah, it got left behind. And so we went on the trip and I didn't have it anymore. And so we were on the trip for a week and I got through it okay. And when I came back, I realized I don't need to back off anymore. I'm done. I'm off it.
I noticed while Donna was taking those, she did talk about how many she was taking. And my memory was between 30 and 60 capsules a day. Some days probably. You took a dose in the morning, at night.
Right.
And then at other days, maybe it was just one dose and you were good. Mm-hmm. But a dose was like 30 something capsules. So that was going on for, I don't know, I want to say a couple of years-ish, somewhere around there. And then there were other changes that actually happened in my professional career with this wonderful company and a publicly traded company, and all of a sudden there's a whole new board of directors and a whole new direction, and feeling a little apprehensive about that. And all of this happens around the same time as I'm thinking about next steps. One of the thoughts that kept returning to me was what Donna had been going through and what she was still going through. Because even though she was taking the herbs, it wasn't like everything was absolutely without challenge. But it felt like you knew something you could do that worked enough to where you felt like I can manage this. Right. That's the way it felt to me. So when other changes happened from a career point of view for me, and I started looking at other options, one of the very first things I looked at was why things had changed when Donna had started using these particular forms and added them to her nutrition. And that led to the realization that most of those formulas actually had adaptogenic herbs. That led to investigating what adaptogenic herbs are, what makes them different. And from then, it was just really a domino effect, a series of events, connecting with past colleagues, with good close friends, talking about all of this, and then looking at the marketplace and noticing that there wasn't a company centered this way for nutrition. And our thought was that if it had made such a difference for Donna, that what if all of the nutritional products were centered around adaptogens? How could that make a difference for people in their lives? Would it accelerate improvement that they're looking for in health? Would it help more people sort of believe that the nutritional and natural way is a good way to work? I mean, there are lots of thoughts about that. And I remember sharing that with Donna, and she was very open to founding a company, even though she knew it would be hard. We didn't know how hard, but
That was probably good we didn't know how
probably
hard it
good,
was.
yeah. And that sort of came to Donna's first request.
So I asked him if there was any way that he could make a product that I could take and just take one product instead of this whole slew of products. And so when they came up with AdaptAble, we tried different formulas as he was working through it, and finally we settled on one, and I realized how much better I felt taking just that product. So I was able to transfer over to just taking one product. I do not have to take 30 to 60 herbs anymore. I just take one product.
As I look back on it now, I think everything that Donna went through and the way she was so open about it and the way she blended kind of consulting with a doctor but making her own decision, and throughout it using the antidepressant when it was needed, but then looking at with a long-term point of view at the herbs and nutrition. All of that, I think, is what led to the way that our philosophy has evolved and formed in the beginning with Soul. And looking back on it now, I can definitely see how key that experience was, because more than ever, I'd say after all these years, I still believe that when we supplement nutrition, the fact that it be balanced, that it has a wide variety of nutrients, but also that it support both physical needs and emotional, and that whole tie that we maybe understand a little bit of.
If my story can help others, then it's worth it. And it's worth sharing, and it's worth other people telling other people what their experiences are, because I think we're in this to help each other. And our connections that we make here are everything. And so if I can learn from my experience and someone can learn from their experience, and then we can go and we can share that. But it just helps you reclaim your life when you get your health back. And for me to have my health mentally and physically allows me to be there for my family and be there for my loved ones and live the life that I want to live.
I want to echo the sentiment of kind of what you just said in terms of the culture of the company. We always hoped from the start, and now we just feel that way. We're so grateful. What we're all about as a company is what you just said. We're in it to help one another, and that's why we do what we do. We can help with health in a way that most people don't know is available to them, and because of really what you went through and what we all learned from that.
I at least now know that I've got the tools and I've got the resources, and I have things that will work for me and will just help me in every aspect of my life.